Hello, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. I hope you haven't forgotten to change your clocks today. Well, they call it progress, but you went 1 hour backwards. What that happens. Sometimes you need to make a step backwards, to proceed, to move forward. And speaking about time, actually, it's just looking a little bit ahead of time. We are going to talk about it probably in the very last of the webinars about time traveling. We'll talk about the peculiar time zones of the world. I mean, there are places in the world with the time difference separated next to each other with the time difference of 15 minutes, 25 minutes. Can you imagine the mess? On the other hand, there are places next to each other with 24 hours difference between the two. So who said that you cannot travel back in time? Of course you can if you live in one of those places and kind of commute between the two. So, but this is all in the future. And I want to say that well, today's subject is pretty broad. Actually, there's a lot of material. It's one of my kind of favorite topics, Europe and this particular places in Europe. So whatever I don't have time to cover today in today's webinar, we'll move to the next one, and it will kind of fit in rather nicely. I promise. So in advance, we ask forgiveness for any kind of technical glitches that can happen, but we'll try to avoid them. It's a new thing for us, just like it is for most of you. So please be generous to us. Well, if you remember from last time, we were talking about the purpose of travel writing, the purpose of traveling as such. And we kind of decided together, I think, that it's all about making a discovery. It's all about noticing something that other people fail to notice. So it's important, as we have established, not to know where you are going, but it's no less important to know what you want to find. And here we are talking about a quest, a search for something. This immediately makes your travel writing or simply your travel full of meaning. Yeah, because otherwise it's just kind of bumbling about. You don't know where you're going and you don't know what you're looking for, and it's kind of a bit messy. So it's preferably to have an object, or a subject that you're after, and then whatever you see on the way amazingly falls into place. Speaking about Europe, this misty, I like this quote, this misty concept. Gerd Mack, by the way, excellent Dutch writer, who those who haven't read his book on Europe, I recommend it very strongly, on Amsterdam. Well, it is indeed very misty. And when I realized for the first time that I was a European, very strongly, it was after 2 years in Australia. As Russian literary critic Belinsky used to say, to write a good book about a country, you must live it first. You can say the same about a continent or a part of the world. So after 2 years in Australia, which I liked a lot, of course, but it was not something familiar. It was not home. The leaves made a different sound in the forest. The sky was different, much higher. Clive James used to warn me about it. I have to get used to it. Lots of other things that somehow made me feel a bit uneasy at times. So I was missing Europe desperately. I kind of was seeing it in my dreams. And just like now, I'm seeing all sorts of places which I visited, because we cannot travel. So basically, again, as I said last time, if you want to create a traveler, put him in prison, first, and then release, and then someone will travel. So it was in Australia that I realized that Europe has, I'm not talking about Russia or England or Holland or whatever. I'm talking about Europe as an entity, as an identity, if you wish. And when I came back to London, to Europe, well, I immediately decided that that's what I want to start exploring first. And luckily, I didn't have very far away to go. And my exploration started from London. It started from this amazing little street, which I already mentioned to you. Last time I wanted to read a little extract from the book Passport to Enclave, where I described the street, but I'll just I'd better not. I'll just tell you about the street for those who don't remember it. So it is the last privately owned street in London and the only one. It's a little lane of Holborn Circus, really tiny lane. It is pretty much exterritorial, believe it or not, because London police until now doesn't uh, have any powers in it, although they probably don't know about it. Well, don't tell anyone, because obviously it will make it a very lucrative morsel for all sorts of offenders. So London police can only visit on the invitation of the commissioners of Ely. This street has a little government which rotates every year. So basically 5 people get elected. There are no residents left. The last one was Father Cunningham, whom I knew quite well, who passed away about 5 years ago. He knew the history very well of that street and was very much about preserving it, uniqueness. But unfortunately, after he died, he was accused, like many, unfortunately, priests, in his position, of misdemeanor towards his parishioners, and kind of was probably forgotten, by many. But I remember him because he loved the place and knew about it very well. So how come it became this source of inspiration for me in my search for Europe? The archbishops of Ely, a very powerful body, ecclesiastical body, when they traveled to London, and they're based in Ely, Cambridgeshire, they had to carry out their missions only from the territory where they actually had some ecclesiastical power. So not to come back every time to Cambridgeshire when they wanted to rule something or to decree something, they decided it probably will be better and cheaper to buy the street and make it part of Cambridgeshire in the center of London, which they did. They built a palace there, and it became part of Cambridgeshire. There was a pub for the servants there, which is still, they're called Your Old Mitre, where the licensing hours until recently were decided by the authorities of Cambridgeshire. So this dichotomy miraculously preserved itself almost until now. I'm saying almost because most of it is now gone, unfortunately, apart from the fact, again, that there is still the government, there is still the beadle there, so you still have a special permission to enter. I do feel it really doesn't matter, even if nothing was left kind of legalistically in it. I still feel this kind of spirit. The moment I entered it for the first time, after speaking with the couple who owned the pub then, who told me about this amazing history of the place, I felt a kind of dislocation, and displacement. And because I used to be feeling, now not so much now, constantly displaced myself. So displacement multiplied by displacement creates, a very euphoria, I would say, some kind of euphoric feeling. So I felt great in that street. Suddenly it was kind of outside everything, in London and not in London. And it was then where I became curious about these places in Europe that are basically situated neither here nor there, so to speak. I started with, inspired by Bill Bryson very much, and encouraged by him, who wrote a very good book about Europe, which was incidentally called Neither Here Nor There. I was reading it, I remember, on the plane from Australia, and thought, well, I can probably do, well, if not better, I can do it equally well, probably. He infected me with this passion for Europe. So, and I decided to start with the smallest European states, which I visited, I think 11 of them, independent and semi-independent, and I'll come back to them a little bit later in the talk. And then, while researching the book, which was called Little Delight, I think I'll probably have a cover somewhere, I found out about, quite accidentally, about a place in Italy or in Switzerland. It's basically between Italy and Switzerland, a handkerchief of a place called Campione d'Italia. Someone told me, and I said, so it's in Italy. I said, no, not quite. So it's in Sweden, not quite either. So basically, I got extremely curious, and it was still before the internet, of course. So you had to go to the library to do any kind of searches, which was quite nice. Actually, I always enjoyed it. So I started looking for material about Campione d'Italia, and it was very, very hard to find anything. I did find it out at least. And it was an official, one of the few remaining in Europe, enclaves, so-called enclaves or exclaves. And it's basically, I use these words interchangeably because it depends on which country you're looking from. For example, if you look at Campione d'Italia, which is a little Italian town surrounded by Switzerland, about 20 kilometers inside Switzerland and on the shores of Lake Lugano. If you look from Switzerland, then Campione is an Italian exclave, enclave in Switzerland. But if you look from Como, from Italy, then it is an enclave. So it's basically, the difference is purely, I would say, even pronunciational. This town, which is neither Swiss nor Italian, like the history of many European, of almost all European enclaves, and there are only like a dozen of them, no more, including semi-enclaves, which are kind of still have access from another country, but this access, this road or the pass goes through a mountain peak, for example. So an enclave, as I soon found out, is a piece of one country, one sovereign country, totally surrounded and landlocked by another. Landlocked here is important because geographers still argue about whether enclaves have to be landlocked or not. And places like Kaliningrad or Ceuta and Melilla, the Spanish towns in Africa, basically in Morocco, they're often called enclaves. And from the point of view of others, it's incorrect because enclaves are not supposed to have access to the sea or even to the big river. Is my favorite kind of enclavist, let's call him like that. Spanish American Dr. Catudal, says, not even a big river. So one piece of a country surrounded by another country and landlocked. So Campione was one of them. And when I first visited this, I was amazed, by this dichotomy that was everywhere. The place looked very Swiss, it was neat. All this, even then recycled bins everywhere, and no kind of rags, drying across little lanes like in Italy and so on. Very picturesque, actually. Rags on the belt, nothing of that, but still beautiful Italian food, lovely restaurants. People are speaking rather quietly, unlike the Italians, and so on and so forth. But then I looked deeper into it. Well, some amazing peculiarities started kind of uncovering themselves. I, for example, found out that, well, the residents of Campione vote in Italian elections, but obviously use Swiss currency and Swiss water supplies and Swiss gas supplies, and lots of other services come from Switzerland, except for police. Well, a unit of Carabinieri arrives from Como daily, and then they go back normally in the end of the in the end of the day, but they have to disarm before they go back to Como because Swiss laws do not allow foreigners to carry arms across Swiss territory. So they leave their weapons in Campione, and so on and so forth. And it was all kind of interesting and peculiar and so on, but there was something more profound about it all. And I couldn't really understand in the beginning what it was. And the other thing was that the residents of that place, they were not quite sure whether they were Italians or they were Swiss, and by most of them would say we are neither Swiss nor Italians, we are just basically Campionese, they would say, and they all worked on the casino, which is actually now closed. And the casino was then one of the biggest in Europe, not accidentally, because in Switzerland, casinos, they're not illegal, but they're kind of frowned upon, whereas in Italy, they're okay. So the Swiss authorities were kind of very worried in the beginning when Italians decided to build the casino there. But then the Italians said, okay, we'll limit we'll establish the ceiling for gambling for Swiss citizens to 5 francs or whatever. And at which point the Swiss said, okay, then, so let's go. Now the casino, I'm not quite sure about the reason, but it's closed, and I don't know where this poor 7,000 or a bit more Campionese, where they all work, because they all work in that casino. So an amazing place, really amazing place. Well, as I said, there are only 4 full-scale enclaves remaining in Western Europe. Let's talk about that. If you talk about the world as a whole, it's a very interesting situation now. It's all being changed because until very recently, in the world there were about over 300 different enclaves and exclaves. But almost all of them, 95%, were on the border of India and Bangladesh, in an area called Kuch Bihar. And it's only 3 years ago that almost all of these enclaves got disenclaved, so to speak. So they were reattached either to mother country or to host country. So, and well, there are none of them left now, basically. So there are not a lot of enclaves left in the world. I think, I wrote somewhere that the status of an enclave must be protected. They all must be made to World Heritage Site because of the uniqueness of their situation. Each of them is a bit of Europe, par excellence. Each of them is a kind of a EU in miniature because they all exist for hundreds of years, and all the issues of cross-border cooperation, currency exchange, all kind of legal things, that Brussels has created huge directorates to deal with, with huge budgets, These little places are used to dealing with them naturally, without any instructions, and have been doing so for hundreds of years. So that's why when I try to raise this question in Brussels, and they have some problems which the enclaves, of course, which I'll mention a little bit further, because again, my travels, being a journalist, a hack, and the former investigative hack, if such thing exists, I always try to find something out, that can be changed, can be helped, basically. Can always try and resolve the problems here and there, as far as I can. So when I was confronted with certain issues, that all the enclave dwellers were facing, I came to Brussels and tried to mention them to, as they're known, Brussels bureaucrats. They all said that there's no such thing as enclaves, and they don't recognize their existence. Oh, well, they should all go to Barle, Nassau, Barle, Hertog, which is, I call it the mother of enclaves. Definitely now it's probably the global mother of enclaves, if Kuch Bihar could be called the mother of enclaves before then, with its nearly 300 enclaves. This Barle, Nassau, with 22 pieces of Belgium and 8 pieces of Holland, in one town, on the territory of one town. And actually, it is the only place in the world where they have so-called sub-enclaves remaining, which is a piece of Holland inside Belgium, inside Holland. Imagine something like that. So they call triple enclaves sometimes. And it's a huge improvement, to the initial situation from the Middle Ages, where there were nearly 600 pieces of disputed territory there. So how did all come about? This kind of military blanket situation, of this versatility. Normally, most of these enclaves appeared either as a result of a historical mistake, some bits are forgotten and not included somewhere and so on, more or less, but mostly as a result of conflicts and reconciliations, hasty reconciliations, I would say, like the one that happened in the area of Barle, with 2 warring dukes, and they were very belligerent people, as we know from the history of the Dutch Republic and so on. They constantly fought. So they decided to make peace at some point, and one of them said, okay, as a gesture of goodwill, I'm going to return all the territories to you that I captured from you. The only thing I want to keep the pieces of land that we've cultivated already, grow something, and where the dwellings stand, like farmsteads, houses. The other one said, "Oh, that's great, excellent." So that's happened. So this patches, of disputed, formerly disputed land, very random patches. There are hundreds of them, of course. They gradually, when in Europe, feudal states are gradually becoming territorial states and so on. They gradually became, parts of different countries, 2 neighboring countries. So that's how all these enclaves appeared in Barle. And now it's probably the only place among the enclaves trying to monetize, using modern expression, which I don't quite like, but they do try to monetize their situation, and they publish posters and postcards and so on. And it's indeed amazing to see the border running across, for example, a rubbish dump, Well, there are no postcards there, but I've been there, because they can dump the forbidden stuff in Belgium on the 3 meters away into the Holland stuff, and that done, it's okay. They don't break any rules. Or it's not uncommon for a shop to have a till, for example, in Holland and the goods in Belgium. So every time they kind of carry out an international transaction, you know, when you buy something in this shop, there was famously a border going through a pub, and the licensing hours differed in Belgium and Holland at that point. So when they would say, you know, last orders in Belgium, you know, the people would leave and enter through the Dutch door, you know, and kept on drinking for another hour. A stage in the theater, a flat. I spoke actually. I spent quite some time there, and I love the place. Absolutely love it. With the local lady called Anne-Marie Meek, I still remember her name, who said they're all quite old-fashioned. That she started telling kind of passionately that well, she knows someone who lives in a house divided, dissected by the border, you know, and even a bedroom, you know, is dissected by the border. And she said, you know, the women in that family always made sure that they were giving birth on the Belgian side of the bedroom because child benefits are kind of high there, than slightly higher than in Holland. That this it's all completely serious. Sounds like a joke, but it's not. So the confusion is such that each house in each street has to be marked with a flag of this or that country, not just with a number, because there's no system to it. The world's only police station divided by the border, not just the station, but the desk. There's only one desk. It's a small place, so the border runs through the police desk. You know, the Belgian policeman cop sits here, the Dutch cop sits on the other side of the desk, and who knows how to, you know, where the crime is committed. You know, it's really very confusing. The car can be parked with a bumper in Belgium, and it's boot in Holland. And it's still like that. It's happening, you know, 2 mayors, 2 fire brigades. And that's incidentally with fire brigades. That's where a very interesting issue, you know, I discovered. So basically with the fire brigades, Belgian and Dutch, there was always a bit of a problem because by the time they would find out where the source of conflagration is, and which country, you know, the poor house or whatever it is can burn well, completely. So there would be nothing to do for the fire brigade. So they decided, okay, whoever hears first, we come to the place there and try to deal with the fire. Easier said than done because they had to connect the fire hoses to the sources of water, you know, on the ground, you know, everywhere, in every town and every city. But the fact was the diameter of the Dutch hoses and the Belgian hoses was different standards. So if the Dutch fire brigade tried to do something on the Belgian kind of territory, it wouldn't work. So they actually approached the EU with that and said, look, can you help us standardize a little bit the situation? There was the same issue with the water pipes there, you know, and obviously Brussels said, no, you know, you don't exist. So so they decided to take it in their own hands. And some local inventors produced an adapter, only 2 or 3 kind of copies. So I had one in my hands actually, which would fit both hoses, you know, from both sides, and gave it to each fire brigade. And so the problem was solved. And in that I could see something extremely European. Europeans adapt. Talking about identity, we now talk a lot about identity. You know, no one really knows what it is. Well, A.L. Kennedy, a very good British Scottish writer, he probably gave the best definition that it's something that can only be defined by abuse and hatred from the foreigners, you know, or from other people. That's how you mold your identity. So we can talk about it for a long time, and probably it's better not to, because it's quite a dangerous concept as well. And my book, Passport to Enclave, is subtitled "The Search for a European Identity." But basically the quest was to try and find it, and enclaves are the best, probably, laboratories, living laboratories for Europeanness, if something like this exists, because they used to live among, you know, among or between different cultures, different languages, like in Libya, for example, a Catalan village in France. Now with the euro, it's become a bit better, you know, like even in Barle, there are no, where people used to have 2 different wallets, one with guilders and the other one the Belgian francs, and knew where to buy everything. Well, something was a little bit cheaper and so on. So now they all have euros, but still the difference in prices remains, which was unbelievable. So basically, in some other enclaves, like Büsingen, for example, which is a rather large German village in Switzerland, in the outskirts of the city of Schaffhausen. Most of the people of Schaffhausen have no idea that they have this bit of Germany in their outskirts, because people, obviously they move freely and same currencies are accepted there. But the poor residents of Büsingen, who are Germans and vote in German elections and pay German taxes, but get their salaries in Swiss francs, and that creates unbelievable problems. So they're really very hard done, and they think they all want to leave, but they can't, because of all kinds of different agreements between the countries.
Get rid of the must be in the picture.
They have the same situation, similar situation as in Barley, not to that extent. So basically, I found each of those places amazingly European. And in the end of my quest for European identity, did I find it? No, I didn't. But I decided in the end that very uncertainty and this very fluid identity is the European identity itself. So the European identity is the uncertainty about your own identity. And that's what I I think that concept was more or less correct. And I spoke a lot about enclaves since then in different places, and people mostly agree with it. So it was absolutely great fun to research. I'll just very quickly mention some other enclaves. It's kind of a time issue. There are not so many. Let's just take Europe, Western Europe. There are some enclaves of Belarus in Russia, of Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the other way around. But closer to us, closer to home, and that's what I'm saying. Don't go too far away afield. You can make these amazing discoveries close to home. So there are basically only 4 full-scale, which is Barley, Büsingen that I mentioned, Livia, Catalan village in France, and Campione d'Italia, plus a handful of so-called penny or semi-enclaves, and they're mostly in the Alps. So as I said, you can access them from the mother country, but theoretically, but in practice you can't. So it's very high up in the mountains, or there's something else. This road is not usable. So, and they are some known. To get to where I had to kind of take a hop across the Alps, in winter and without skis. That was an amazing story, which is in my Passport to Enclavia book and reproduced in the bumper book as well. So one of the most stupidest things I've done in my life, but I survived somehow. Only to make sure that, some of the, I arrived in some now having crawled across the Alps really on my belly and frozen myself frozen stiff. And someone tells me, yeah, but it's no longer a penny enclave. I said, why? I said, because they found a proper road connecting some noun, which is a kind of Swiss village in Austria, well, connecting it to Switzerland. And I said, oh God, so I crawled on my belly all for nothing, this time. So then there is a very interesting place called Jungholz, which is an Austrian village surrounded by Germany, also in Rhetish Alps. And this is the wealthiest spot in the world, officially, yes. And why is it, how do define the wealthiest spot in the world? It's the place with the biggest amount of private capital per capita. That's just a little village, but it has 3 branches of German's biggest banks operating from it. Because these banks, because they're on Austrian territory, they operate according to Austrian privacy laws, which are second only to Swiss ones. So very lucrative for all kinds of, money laundering and stuff like that. I bet there are lots of Russian oligarchs, who are kind of keeping their money there in Jungholz. Not as well known as kind of Zurich or even Monaco, but so it is the world's wealthiest sport officially. And there is a Kleine Warzeltal Valley, also 3 Austrian villages surrounded by Germany, also in the mountains. There was a place called Wendbahn, there is still, which was, it's no longer, it's a decommissioned now railway. When I was there, it was still a fully functioning, although very poorly functioning railway. Well, basically, it's a Belgian railway that cutting into Germany and making 5 pockets of Germany inside Belgium, because by international law, not just the track, but also 5 meters on both sides of the track of the territory. They belong to the country that owns the railway. So it's no longer a railway, but it's a bicycle path, which still maintains this enclave forming quality. Then Van used to be the only enclave forming railway in the world, and now they have instead the world's only enclave forming bicycle path. So who cares? still interesting. And lastly, and interestingly, you know, the place that I visited not far from Schönhausen as well, called Verenahof, was a very small piece of German farmland, you know, surrounded by Switzerland, which stopped being part of Germany. It was so-called disenclaved in 1964, I think. The process took a couple of years, 1964, 65, 66. So it was reattached back to Germany. Of course, Germany had to pay some kind of reparation to Switzerland, you know, because it was a strange situation with this patch of land. There was nothing much on it left. But during the Second World War, some rather high-ranking Nazi officer, you know, with his with several soldiers, you know, they were actually hiding on the territory for quite a long time, and no one could do anything to get them back, you know, because again, the French wanted to get them back and to arrest them, you know, but they had to pass through Swiss territory to do that. And the Swiss, you know, Switzerland, which was neutral, as you know, it was very kind of sensitive to these matters, you know, especially they had to be armed, obviously, to arrest the Nazi officer. So they had to reach a special agreement and sign it, you know, which allowed this temporary corridor. So the French soldiers went to that patch of land and arrested the Nazi officer. So fascinating stories, and I'm really pleased to have found out about the existence of these amazing places, you know, right on our doorstep. But now probably make a very quick break, and I'll tell you a little bit about the mini states and micronations as well.
Okay, Vitali, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. So now we're just going to announce last month's competition winner. Okay. And that was the competition for writing your own introduction to a book or a story. And we had some great entries for that, which Vitali judged. And some of them were, for example, it was the cheap hamburger that had really damaged his stomach, not the lion's claw. Or I asked the Greek farmer, how far to the next town? He shrugged and said about 2 cigarettes. But the winner was actually, as judged by Vitali, the wallet was gone, the beard too. So the winner of this competition was Mr. Slava Novikov, and he has been sent a copy of Vitali's latest book, the bumper book of Vitali's travels. Now, we will be having a competition at the end of today, again for another copy of this book. Vitali will be going through the rules for this a bit later, and you will get some more information as the afternoon goes on. Vitali will be giving you some ideas and talking a bit later on about it. But just to give you a taster, the competition is going to be for you to name your own micronation or your own country. So you can be thinking about that. It gives you a bit of food for thought, but stay tuned into Vitali, who'll be giving you some hints and tips and examples of this, of doing this. So that will be a little bit later on. And so that, I think, is all for now. Vitali, are you ready to continue?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we'll come back to the competition and to the micronations. There's again, there's quite a lot of confusion between these two words, two concepts, microstates or mini-states and micronations or mini-nations. They mean two completely different things. Well, I'll give you a little tip, you'll understand what I mean probably better as I talk about it. When you hear nation in the end, micronation, micronation, mini-nation, it means it's a self-proclaimed entity, it's a country not recognized by absolutely anyone, apart from themselves. And half of those countries are more a joke than anything else, but some of them are actually quite serious. So I'll come back to that. When we talk about states, microstates or mini-states, they are full-scale countries, recognized by the United Nations and sometimes having more embassies than people in them, but it kind of doesn't matter. They are full-scale nations with all the powers of the nations. And what are the signs of a country? Have you ever thought about it? Well, it's actually pretty basic, and anyone can proclaim a new country, obviously. Whether it's going to be recognized, that's a different question, but it has to have some territory, preferably. Although I'll tell you that there are countries that have no territory whatsoever and are still considered countries. It's actually only one that I know, but even that country has a little room, and it's actually it is, to my mind, the world's smallest state, not the Vatican, because it has diplomatic relations with almost every country in the world. So territory, population, even of one, like my own country, imaginary country from childhood probably, and recently I was doing a blog called View from Vitalia. It's called Vitalia, and theoretically it has a population of one, so what? It's can still be democratic, not necessarily authoritarian, and it has to have some kind of geographical entity about itself. So there's a combination of population, territory, and some kind of politics, because one geographer defined the country as basically as a political island, basically. So it's a political division, basically. So there has to be some kind of geopolitical essence to it. So as I said, anyone can form its own. But what I started my European quest with were so-called mini-states. Why was I very interested in mini-states? Because I come from the world's largest state, the USSR, and still remaining as it is Russia now, Russian Federation, still the world's largest state by far. And it was kind of the last and the only argument of the system in its favor in the Soviet Union, saying, look, we are all so huge, so that's why we are always right. Look at Switzerland, they're tiny, 543 times, actually, the Soviet Union was larger than Switzerland. I calculated them. 583 times less less democratic probably, and less prosperous. But anyway, so size is not everything. Small is beautiful. I wanted to explore these tiny countries because, as we were always told back in the Soviet Union, they couldn't even survive being so small, and it's just kind of a miracle that they still exist. So I started visiting them. I visited 5 fully independent states and several semi-independent states. Like here I'm talking about places like the Isle of Man, for example, or the Channel Islands. Each of them is a semi-independent state with all the paraphernalia of statehood, parliament, executive, legislative branches, sometimes even police, but still not sovereign, still under the sovereignty of some other state. And normally, the matters of defense and foreign affairs, are looked after by someone else. The Faroe Islands, all the Channel Islands, Mount Essos, about which I'm going to talk in my next webinar, an amazing monastic republic in the north of Greece. They're all independent, yes, but they're independent dependencies again, like someone said. so I visited several of those too, and each of them was fascinating, and each of them was different from another. Uh, well, I can say that, for example, I have to kind of go through that fairly quickly. I didn't quite like Monaco, out of them, because it appeared a bit vulgar to me. And since then, I've been to Monaco dozens of times to conferences and so on, and I quite like what Prince Albert is now trying to do about in the environment. It's probably the greenest place in the world now. He's very keen on that because about 20, 30 years ago, it was really a totalitarian state where you could be thrown out for saying something not very nice about the royal family. There are lots of spies. It was actually, and I think still is, the country officially with the world's highest per capita rate of policemen per person. Believe it or not, here, little Monaco. But it's safe, completely safe. A lady can walk from the casino in the middle of the night, very scantily dressed, and nothing will happen to her. I kind of didn't like the spirit of it, the vulgarity of it, but it's changing, it's improving, I would say. And again, its appearance is the result of a historical mistake. It was kind of during multiple wars. I think the Austro-Hungarian Empire was involved there as well. It was left out from a peace treaty at some point, and that's how it became a separate entity. But also, it's populated by its own kind of ethnic minority. That's minority as well. The Monegasque people, who are officially not allowed to gamble in the casinos. If you're a Monegasque, you can only serve there, but you cannot actually gamble. Don't know how they check. One of the hardest passports in the world to get, Monacan passport. Then there was San Marino, very different, not as rich, although also duty-free. Heaven, of course, and so on. It was ruled by many years by Italian communists, and this probably contributed to making it into one of the world's biggest bureaucratic boils, because this country, when I visited it, it's a bit bigger now. It had about 25,000 people. It had 17 ministries on top of 3 police forces. It's just unbelievable. They have such complicated system of judiciary there. There's several levels of judiciary, and obviously I think it's a parliamentary monarchy which is ruled simultaneously by 2 people, by 2 prince regents. This push-pull thing, so-called diarchy. That's an interesting term as well. There are only 5 diarchies in the world, which is a place ruled simultaneously by 2 people. I wonder what if they disagree about something, and so what happens? They probably throw a coin. I don't know. Well, another of this diarchies, by the way, you'll never guess, is Northern Ireland. Yes, it's Northern Ireland, because in Northern Ireland, the first minister has exactly the same powers as his deputy or her deputy. So it's officially listed among the 5 diarchies of the world. Another diarchy, another mini state of Europe, is Andorra, which is ruled by 2 foreigners, simultaneously, the Bishop of Urgell and the President of France. Although I wondered whether Macron actually even knows that he is also the supreme ruler of Andorra. Although in Andorra, I think their role is more ceremonial, like the Queen here, for example. So they don't really, because they have a parliament as well, and the prime minister and so on, with whom I spoke. So you see, they're all different, they all rule differently. But San Marino, coming back to it, amazed me by them. I think probably every other person there is a bureaucrat. Probably they cannot pay them very well, because when I went for dinner to one of the restaurants one evening, I had this very posh-looking waiter, kind of very looking a bit like an Oxford Don and so on. And when I asked him, I said, I can see you're not a professional waiter, doing something else. He said, yeah, I'm the foreign minister of San Marino. He said, maybe he was fibbing me, but I think he actually was the foreign minister. I wouldn't be surprised. This is kind of bureaucratic push-pull monarchy. But the country that I liked and still like most of all was, believe it or not, Liechtenstein. And it was maybe because it was the first country which I visited, in my exploration. And I had a long conversation with the prince in the castle, sitting on top of the mountain there in Vaduz. Direct opposite to San Marino, Liechtenstein, which again has a very complicated history, and by some estimates is the world's richest country still, about 30,000 people. It's a mini industrial giant as well. That's what many people don't know. Number one in the world in the production of false teeth. Ivoclar, famous factory, very topical would be now, but I visited it when I still didn't eat artificial teeth. I thought I didn't. Beautiful, beautiful teeth. My mother, who was a chemical engineer in stomatology, I remember her looking at the brochures from Ivoclar, still in Ukraine, in the Soviet Union. Unbelievable place. Plus sausage skins, number one producer in the world. But now it's kind of a bit of a joke, sausage skin, which they do it. But there's lots of precision engineering and stuff. So they're doing extremely well. And they're ruled by 6 people, not including them. Basically, it's not true. They're ruled by the prince. It's the last fully feudal country in Europe. Sark was another one, by the way. That's a semi-independent state, one of the Channel Islands, which was ruled by the seigneur for many years. But literally 10 years ago, it all changed. The powers of the seigneur were seriously curtailed. It's a shame. I knew the previous senior, Michael Beaumont, very facetious guy, joked a lot. Like about the law, that they had the law and still have it in Sark, whereby the seigneur, the feudal ruler, is the only person who can own female dogs, bitches. so he was joking a lot about it. So the law still stands. Liechtenstein is much more serious, of course, but the prince has a full power, and recently, not so long, several years ago, he can disband, as he did, disband the parliament. He can announce kind of elections, and some time ago he asked for his powers to be increased, and even threatened the people who didn't agree with that. You can leave now, and of course, who would leave Liechtenstein? So he got away with that. But as a person, he is not dictatorial at all. Very accessible. He just used to. He's a bit old now, probably, but then he used to jog in the mountains, around Vaduz every morning, and everyone would wave to him, this kind of thing. Very interesting country, and there was one episode that I discovered. I mean, it's again, I'm proud of certain discoveries I made, and there was this one and another one I'm going to mention, by the end of this talk. I discovered a very little known page of the Second World War while in Liechtenstein. And I'm very proud of it. And it happened quite accidentally. I mean, I used to walk in the forest there quite a lot, and I think I told you last time how I wandered into Austria at some point without realizing it because it's so small. So I'll never forget it, and then ran back towards the border in fear. But it was all okay because there was no one at the border post, it was abandoned. So while walking in the forest, on another occasion, I saw a name of the village called Borsch. Borsch, I said, oh, how interesting, why Borsch? It's kind of my favorite beetroot soup. Of course, I cook very good one myself. So I started asking around, and at that time in Liechtenstein, there lived rather well-known, in Russia at least, person, a philanthropist, and just art collector, whose name was Baron Edward von Falzfein. Everyone knows him. He founded the wildlife resort in Ukraine called Toscania. No, it's all the aristocratic Russian family with a German name, which is also quite typical. So I went to see him and actually spent several nights in his home. He died very recently. He was 106 years old, but then he was still a very kind of agile and energetic 90-year-old. So he had a good memory, and he told me the whole story of this amazing episode. Basically, in the end of the Second World War, Liechtenstein obviously was neutral, just like Switzerland. 500 Russian soldiers from the Russian army that fought for the Germans, led by Holzim Smyslovsky. It was not Vlasov's army. It was there quite a lot. There were actually, I think, 2.5 million Russian soldiers, on the German side. Again, not too many people know it. And it was the Russian soldiers actually that liberated Prague. not Russians who in the end of the war they started fighting the Germans against Germans. So it was that army. But anyway, these 500 soldiers, Russian soldiers who had fought for the Germans, they crossed the border in Liechtenstein with their commander, Count Konstantin Smyslovsky, and asked for political asylum there. And they went to the prince, of course, was always the father of Hans Adam, who is now the prince and whom I met. And the prince said, yes, okay, yeah. So they kind of made a camp, there near the border. And imagine 500 people is quite a lot of people. It was such a tiny country that never had an army. It had an army of its own, but ages ago, and it never fought in any battle. So suddenly this Russian invasion. And then, of course, Stalin's emissaries, like they did in all other countries, France, Germany, even, as I found out, Norway and Scandinavian countries who kept Russian prisoners of war, and those Russians who fought for the Germans, they asked to get them back, And Liechtenstein was the only country in the world that found strength and stamina to say no to Stalin. Stalin couldn't do anything with this little state and its prince. And the prince said no. They asked for political asylum in my country, I'm not letting them go. And they even came, he couldn't refuse, the visit. So they came on a visit and threatened some and kind of tried to bribe some of them. They persuaded 300 of these 500 to return, and they were all obviously executed on arrival, ended up in labor camps. 200 stayed and survived, most of them went abroad. I think only one soldier left in Liechtenstein and got married there, and probably 25 years later, as the local law still in force, says you can apply for a citizenship, and then the country has a referendum, and they decide whether you become a citizen or not. So he became a citizen. Only one stayed, and most of others went to South America and different other places, and so on. So Liechtenstein, this tiny little country, found enough strength to say no to Stalin. And obviously, it's not publicized a lot, this story, because one of the most shameful pages of the Second World War for most of the Western countries, including this country and France and the United States, and who were in charge of some of the Russian prisoners of war, that they gave them all back to Stalin, not wanting basically to spoil their relationship with the dictator, being scared, and all those people ended up very badly. Lots been written about it. It's really a horrible story. But Liechtenstein was different, and obviously you can have nothing but respect for these countries. And when people say, "Oh, it's just kind of all this mailbox companies, then this and that," yes, yeah, they have to make their living. They have mailbox companies. So what? Yeah, they have probably the world's best, definitely the world's best prison. And little police station there. Used to lack prisoners. Probably now it's a bit different because there are more people who are trying to get to Liechtenstein. So an amazing country, an amazing experience, and again a lesson to be learned. I mean, each of these countries can teach us a lesson, and Liechtenstein, of course, probably can teach us more than one, and that's little Europe for you. Who would know? And I wanted to don't have much time left, unfortunately. Tell you about another discovery and kind of brush past. Maybe, next webinar, as I said, we'll probably have a bit more time. There may be a chance to come back to this point. And yeah, I have to talk about the competition. So the competition was about micronations. Micronations, there are about 70 of them in the world. As I said, half of them, well, they're not recognized by anyone, because there are also so-called countries with limited recognition as well, to confuse even further, But these are the countries like South Ossetia, for example, or Transnistria, several other countries normally, in the war zones, still disputed, who are recognized only by their neighbors and themselves, by similar countries and no one else. But I may mention them again next time. But micronations are not recognized by anyone, and how can they be? Because most of them are just some people trying to make a point. Like the most well-known is probably Sealand, which is an abandoned military fort, off the coast of Essex. And the chap called Paddy Bates, in 1967, I think, British Army major, took hold of it and proclaimed himself the king and his family, the whole royalty. And since then, it had a very interesting history, actually. They couldn't do anything with it because it had everything, all the elements of the country, territory, population. What else do you need? And it wanted to do some duty-free stuff from there, you know, and to do some kind of offshore banking. And there are lots of attempts, you know. I think none of them succeeded. It's abandoned now, but there were attempts to capture it by some kind of invaders, and shots were exchanged and so on. It's a fascinating story. There's a book just published about it, you know, Sealand, written by the Prince Regent, his son, you know. Not very well written, but you know, princes don't have to write well. So that's another micronation. There are several in Australia, you know, like the Hutt River Nation, you know, this and that. Many of them were being formed by some, I don't know, literally lazy school kids, you know, who just proclaimed their own bedrooms, you know, a separate nation, and said that they're kind of immune from going to school or doing anything at all. And they all get registered, you know, somewhere, and so they exist. But this is, of course, more as a joke. Asgardia, one of the recent additions, is the first space nation, space kingdom. You know, it's some kind of Russian Azeri oligarch. He launched a small international satellite, you know, with the internal space of, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, 20 cubic centimeters or whatever there is. But because by international law, no one can own anything in space, you know, it all belongs to kind of the whole population of the Earth. But he says, because it's inside the satellite, you know, it belongs to no one. So it's my independent nation. And they have already about 300,000, I think, citizens. There is a website, of course, and so you can get citizenship and so on. It's quite an interesting point. So let's see what happens to that, the Space Kingdom. Well, there was a kind of disappointed, another Russian oligarch. They all want to have their own countries, who tried to form the imperial throne, a new Russian empire in Kiribati, believe it or not, and in this atoll, you know, in Oceania, you know. And initially they gave him 3 abandoned islands, but then changed their mind. So he started looking elsewhere and found bits and pieces in Antarctica here and there, you know, and wanted to bring the new Russian Tsar there. You know, it's still, as I said, it's still in flux, this story. So let's see what happens. So that's quite a lot of them. Liberland, for example, I'm giving you some names, you know. Liberland with Bitcoin is the only currency on the border of Croatia and I think Croatia and Slovenia, somewhere there, you know, in the Balkans. Also no population. Hay on Wye, the book town, one of my favorite places, you know, where the now late Richard Booth, you know, proclaimed it an independent state in the 60s, a kingdom of books, you know, and proclaimed himself King Richard the Book-Hearted and so on. A joke, but a nice joke. Incidentally, I forgot, sorry, I just, sometimes when you're in a hurry, you forget things. I promised to tell you about what the world's smallest states indeed, which is not Vatican, but it is called SMOM, SMOM, all capital letters, which is the abbreviation for the Order of Malta. And it has no territory. It has one room, you know, in Rome, its headquarters, but it has diplomatic relations with 123 countries, if I'm not mistaken, and a huge fleet of airplanes, you know, transport planes. It's a, you know, kind of used to be very belligerent, but now quite a charitable or order, you know, and they do correspond to all the symbols of a separate nation state, because they have a population of 2 as well. So Vatican looks like a giant compared to them. They don't really mention it very often as the world's smallest state, but it is. There's no denial. There's no denying the fact. So if next time someone asks you, like you did in QI, you know, what's the world's smallest states? It's not the Vatican, you know. There will be a forfeit buzzer, you know. It's the SMOM. But coming back to micronations, and I have kind of to change things as we go. I think I'm going to tell you about my other major discovery, Siborga, another micronation, which I mentioned last time. I think probably I'll have to do it next time, and I'll talk about many more curious discoveries that I was lucky to make in my travels because we are running out of time today. But the example of my favorite micronation is the Republic of Molossia, believe it or not. And I call it, it's from the geographical feature that I wrote about micronations, the most delightful micronation on earth, founded in 1999 by Kevin Bow from Nevada, with his house as the country's headquarters. And it is a parody of a totalitarian state, and that's why it's actually quite funny. I found about it actually from a peculiar book which combines constitutions of several micronations, about a dozen. There is such a book even, you know, it's a pride of my collection. There I found some points from the constitution of Molossia in the shape of so-called presidential proclamations, and I'll quote some of them. It's all kind of written down and official, so to speak. It is illegal to cause a catastrophe. Torpedoes may not be set off in the country. It is illegal to wear cowboy boots unless you already own at least 2 cows. It is illegal to hunt moss under a street light and to play percussion instruments in any bathroom. Sunshine is guaranteed to the masses, and that kind of echoes quite a lot of similar Soviet or maybe Chinese and North Korean slogans as well. Sunshine is guaranteed to the masses. And then so on. And the last bit here is His Excellency has decreed that Molossia will have its own time zone, Molossian Standard Time. This time zone will be 19 minutes ahead of Pacific Standard Time and 41 minutes behind Mountain Standard Time. And this is actually quite funny, but it has a real meaning to me, at least, because there are some real life, not joke, you know, time zones in the world with very strange kind of arrangements. But we are going to talk about them probably in the very last seminar, number 5, and in the next one, many more of interesting from my point of view and fairly unique discoveries. So today I think we've run out of time. Thank you very much. And if you have time, I'll ask our technical gurus to say whether you've got time for some questions.